guys give it up for Mary.
Okay, thanks. So I need to give you a little background about my father, and this story will be about him and his difficulty in accepting the marriages of his children. So to start with, when I was little, he told us, when we'd ask him, how old are you? He'd say, I'm 500 years old, because he thought he had the problems of the world on his shoulders. So we went to school and would say, how old is your dad? He's 30. How old is your dad? He's 500, you know? Because everything your father tells you is true. Okay, and you know, the other thing about him was he did everything his way. In about 1961, he decided he didn't like tax forms, so he built the George H. Edgerton and Sue W. Edgerton tax schedule. And he made it up, and he sent it in, and about 20 years later, he got a letter from the IRS saying, you know, we can't accept this. You need to send in all these different forms. And he said, I've been doing this for 20 years, and I'm not stopping now. And they backed off. Okay, so we go to marriages. So my sister graduates from college, and she's ready to get married. And, you know, ese es un hombre muy duro, which in Spanish directly translates is, that's a man who's very hard, but it actually means that's a man with control issues. So he did not pick out the husband, and he, you know, he's too short, you know. So it was the first marriage for him, and so he said, well, that's it. If you get married, I'm never going to speak to you again. You know, we'd been a pretty tight family, so this was very hard. So she went off and she got married, and it was very hard, and I had a brother and then me, the youngest, and so it kind of, so everything fell on me to be the daughter who would make up for the daughter who was not the daughter anymore. Then my brother got married, and so he didn't go to John's wedding either, because Jane went to John's wedding, and since Jane went to John's wedding, he couldn't go to John's wedding. It's like, okay, you know, shuffle these pieces around, and, you know, and he would write me letters that would say, I want to see her, but I think if she came to the door, I would have a heart attack. It's, oh my God, how can this family be so dramatic? And then she would say, oh, when he might come by to pick me up at a house she's in, she'd say, shall I pull the curtain and let him look at me from a distance? And I'm like, oh my God, I can't stand this being in the middle. But anyway, finally one day I was going to get married, you know? I was 28. And so I called up my mother, and I said, Mom, I'm getting married. And she says, oh my God, don't do this to me. Can't you just live with them? And my parents didn't believe in premarital sex, okay? So I wrote him one of those nice daughterly letters, and I said, you know, I finally found the man I want to be with, and he reminds me a lot of you, which actually wasn't true, but... And could I actually have one of your mother's, he had a bunch of gold rings, one of the gold rings to use as a wedding band. And my mother said, you know, he actually smiled when he read the letter. And so he wrote me back, and he said, all right, bless this union. So I said, so you're coming? And he said, what, are you kidding? I didn't go to your sister's wedding. I didn't go to your brother's wedding. Why should I go to your wedding? I mean, that would be unfair. So that was September. So in November, I said, I'm bringing my husband home to meet you for Thanksgiving. And he said, well, why do you have to bring him home so fast? I mean, are you expecting to divorce him? I'm like, well, no, you're supposed to meet him. I don't want to meet him. I'm like, what? So I called my mother, and I said, you know, it's kind of natural when you get married to bring your husband home to meet your family. I mean, it would have been more natural had they met him at the wedding. And so she says, you can't bring him, we have rats in the house. I'm like, oh my God, and my parents had gotten kind of old and settled in their ways, and they wouldn't let anybody come inside the house, and I'm like, oh my God, they have rats. They won't hire an exterminator. This is a disaster. And so I called my sister, because being the two women in the family, we kind of made plans, and then would tell my brother to go do it, because he was the golden boy. So we're like, okay. I said, Jane, they have got rats. They need exterminators, and they won't call them. And so Jane calls my mother, and she says, oh, you know, I just made that story up so she wouldn't come. So then I got really upset, and I called Jane, and I think I was kind of crying. And of course, I guess Jane had been through this, but she called my mother, and she said, well, you know, I think our youngest is kind of soft, and I don't know if she's going to get over this. And so I sat down and I wrote a letter to my father, and he was a man that you had one shot with to get a point across, because if he started arguing with you, it was over. Over. I mean, look at the IRS, right? Over. So I said, you have a duty as a father, and if you don't want to perform that duty, you can take your name off my birth certificate. Let me know. He said, you can come. So I came, and my sister came. We were having a big family reunion with cousins and everything. We decided there's a lot of extended family, so Jane can stay at one house and another house anyway. So Jane, there was a party for the early arrivals. Jane was there. My father arrived with my mother, and my mother said, so you can leave me here because, you know, Jane's inside. And she said he didn't say a word. He actually walked inside to the party, started talking to my brother-in-law. Jane went off to the bedroom to get her baby, to bring it out and show him. And we were a family again. And we had a dad again. And I got divorced and I got married a second time, so he came to that wedding.